When the loss of a loved one becomes overwhelming and the purpose has gone out of your life, then it's time for a new direction, a new sense of hope. It's a time for discovery, as presented by St. Luke's United Methodist Church, with your host, Dr. David Thomas.
Welcome to a time of discovery, as we share together about an experience that is common to all of us. We call it grief, that inner pain that we experience at a time of loss. To help us with our discussion, we're going to share with Reverend Robert Gorell, serving as the associate pastor at St. Luke's United Methodist Church, serving in the area of evangelism and in our counseling ministry. Dr. Robert Outlaw, medical doctor who is now serving in psychiatry, an active layman at St. Luke's United Methodist Church. Dr. Robert Eddy, associate pastor at St. Luke's Church, serving in our area of pastoral care. And I'm David Thomas, senior pastor at St. Luke's Church. What is the greatest loss you've ever experienced in life? You know it can bring an inner pain, a wound that never heals with just words. We call that inner pain sorrow, and the process of healing we call grief. And we go through a grieving process in time of loss of death, and the death of a loved one, or sometimes in the loss of a relationship that would be caused by a divorce, or even a loss of a job or a position, sometimes even moving away from that which is familiar, can cause that experience that we call grief or sorrow. That's common to all of us. We've all experienced that pain in one way or another because we're going through all kinds of adjustments in our life. There's a passage in the Old Testament, the book of Ecclesiastes, that shares those kinds of adjustments and changes that come to us in life. It says, "There is a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to root up, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance," and explains all of the different adjustments that we have to face in life. And that passage ends by saying God has made everything beautiful in its time, and He has set eternity into the heart of His people. The adjustments that come can be very difficult and sometimes very painful. And Robert, sometimes when we face a loss in life, particularly a loss of a loved one, we begin to wonder why. Why did this have to happen to me? Or why did it happen now? Or maybe what did I do to cause this loss? What would you say to a person like that?
David, I'd say you haven't been singled out. We're all mortal beings. That's the way we were made by the Creator's hand. We were put together that way. Mm-hmm. The great beauty of our faith, the power of our faith, says that there's something more than that, and that's the hope that there's something even beyond that. But you haven't been singled out in any way. We all lose loved ones. That's part of life.
I understand that.
Robert, I've been asked many times, is death God's will?
Only in a general sense, Bob, in that God created the world in the way it is. He's the author of natural order, so that we are mortal beings as part of His plan. But I don't believe that God singles out people or inflicts a punishment on anyone in that way.
Thank you.
Dr. Outlaw, are there some normal stages that a person would go through, a process that we would call grief?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, back in 1966, did an excellent study, and she was able to identify 5 distinct stages or processes that a person grieving will go through. They begin with a shock, disbelief, and an unwillingness to identify or to believe that this is happening to us. And then there is a stage of anger in which the person may become angry at God, may be angry at the person who died, or at themselves. And then as the process evolves, the person begins to try to bargain with God, to bring back the lost one. And as they realize this is impossible to do, they become depressed. And this is a very significant stage. Depressed because they can't tolerate the loss and they can't look forward to life without the lost person. Normally, the person works through this, and then the final stage is one of acceptance, where you realize the loss is gone, you can't do anything about it, you can't bring back the lost person, and you begin to make a new life for yourself.
So there are various stages we go through, as you mentioned. Can we get hung up in any of those various stages?
Yes, unfortunately, it happens frequently. A person gets hung up in the shock stage, in which they just absolutely refuse to accept the death of a loved one. The other place they get hung up mostly is in the depression, feeling the loss so severely that they never are able to get over it.
Yes. There are various stages we go through. Sometimes, as we go through those, we have negative reactions, like even feeling a sense of guilt. Maybe we failed to do something that we should have done. What do you say to a person like that, Robert?
Yeah, we call this the if-only syndrome.
Yes.
That a person has, and I think this depends on the depth of the relationship. If it's a close relationship, and for instance, a person loses a spouse, and they wonder, if only I had been more sensitive to have gotten this person to the doctor quicker, or if only I'd done more, been more attentive. And this brings on an awful load of guilt. And it depends upon the depth of that relationship. But it's very common, and I think we should really understand to accept that in a person.
Mm-hmm. Bob, are there different kinds of guilt?
Yes, Dr. Outlaw and I were discussing this, and it seems that there is such a thing as inappropriate guilt. And that means that the person who is left has done all they can. They've been very attentive and very caring, have done everything they can, but out of the depth of their grief, and they're difficult to accept the loss of a loved one, then they feel very guilty if they could only done more. And this is inappropriate in that stage because they couldn't have done more, and they need to be helped to understand that. Mm-hmm. But also there is such a thing as appropriate guilt, in which there was neglect, and the person may not have been very caring, and and then they're shocked to understand this, that they have not been caring. Now the person's gone, and they can't do anything about it, so they're very, very guilty at this point. And this may take a lot of time to overcome this, may even take professional help before they can get out of that deep, deep feeling of guilt because they have been uncaring.
Dr. Eddie, how do we help a person of deep religious faith under these circumstances?
Well, of course, a person with a deep faith in God does have some resources. And as helpers, we can remind them, I think, of this. And to remind them in very gentle ways, realizing that they're struggling here, that if there has been neglect, even if there has been appropriate guilt, that there is a way, after asking for forgiveness, that God does forgive, and that we are accepted and we are reclaimed. And this can be a source of great comfort to a person of faith, yes.
Robert, we do have negative feelings and experiences through the time of grief. Mm-hmm. How can we help create some positive experiences and maybe even positive memories?
That's a process within a process, David.
Mm-hmm.
The first step in that is to begin to come to grips with your feelings, to be able to let those feelings out and to talk about those feelings. And they may include things like guilt or hostility or anger at God, any of those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But to talk about those things and to get those things out. And then to begin to feel reaffirmed as a person. Bob talked about that if only I'd done something different. But to begin to feel like, well, I'm okay, and this does happen, and it's natural, and it's a part of life. The third step in that process is to begin to break ties with the deceased. And that's not as harsh as it sounds at first, But it's important to understand that the reality has changed and that that relationship has changed completely. And you need to begin to break ties with that old relationship because of the next step, which is a step that I think is particularly highlighted in the Christian faith. But the resurrection of that relationship and the resurrection of that person, to know that that person has gone on to something better, and to begin to visualize that person and to enjoy the memories of that person's life and the relationship you had with that person, but begin to image and see that person in that better place. And then finally, to begin to deepen your relationship with other people, to begin to make new relationships, and to begin to reaffirm your relationship with God. And that will help you enjoy your spiritual life and where that other person is spiritually, and to enjoy that relationship where it is now as a completely spiritual relationship.
Well, Robert, let me ask you, if I wanted to be a helper to someone that's grieving, how could I help that person recapture some of those positive memories that are important?
Best thing you can do, Bob, is to talk with that person, and particularly to listen to that person and to help that person talk about their feelings and about their experience. That's what you can do to help.
Dr. Outlaw, I'm a person that has suffered a great loss. I know there are stages that I go through, and I know I need to somehow create a better image. But it's tough. And how do I cope with this loss and the sorrow that I feel?
David, the most important thing is to learn to accept what's happened. And I mean, make a distinction between accepting or recognizing reality and fully accepting it with our feelings. Most people recognize reality as having happened, but have difficulty accepting the pain, the sorrow, and the suffering that goes with it. And this is where we get hung up so many times, is in the pain and suffering. So accepting is different than just recognizing reality.
Dr. Outlaw, sometimes and maybe we've experienced it ourselves, but sometimes we hear people say that where there's been a loss of a close loved one, maybe a spouse, that they think they can hear this person's voice, or they sense their presence in the room with them. Is this normal?
Perfectly normal. And the longer the relationship and the more loving and intense it's been, the more apt the person will have these experiences, not once, but several times. Doesn't mean they're losing their mind or that they're going crazy. This is a normal reaction in a grieving process.
Dr. Eddie, we all know someone that has lost a loved one or a friend. And when we go to be with them, we feel awkward sometimes. What do you say or what do you do that would help that person?
I think we ministers get asked this question quite a bit by our members when they have heard of a friend who's lost a loved one. And then they come and say, I don't know how to handle this. What do I do? Or what do I say? And I think the way to handle that would be to say to the person that words are not all that important. The important thing is to go and to be there and to be a friend. Of course, this depends on the depth of the relationship with the person who's grieving. If it's a casual relationship, then maybe just a simple call, a visit. But if that's a very deep relationship, then this may be demand a long experience of being with that person and just being free to share emotions and to be a good listener and just to be there and be a friend. I think that's what's important here.
It's not so much what we say, but just being present with that person.
Bob, are there things that the grieving person sometimes says that are troublesome or confusing to the helper or the would-be helper?
I think this is sometimes a shocking thing that happens to a helper that wants to, they go in all good intentions to help this person who's grieving, and they're just shocked by what this person is saying. You know, they show anger at God, they show anger at their loved one, and I think the person who's being the helper needs to understand that this is normal, and they need to be allowed to talk that out. And here again, a good listener is what is very, very helpful in the grief process.
What would be the most important thing a helping person could do for a deeply religious person under these circumstances?
One of the things they can do is to sense that, or be relaxed about it, and to not try to explain why this has happened. Don't try to explain the death away, that it's happened, but to be on a continuing basis after all the friends and relatives have gone home, to be willing to be there and to be a listener. That is the most helpful thing you can do.
It's been helpful to be able to share together about what we do as we go through the process of grief and know that there are different stages, and sometimes we can even get hung up in those stages, and sometimes we need help from outside. The importance of drawing upon our faith, and in that faith be able to create new images and new memories and go on with life as it comes before us, and even how we can be helpful to someone else who's gone through that experience of grief. We're going to take a break and look at some of the resources that would be available to us as we go through this process of grief. And then we're going to come back and visit with someone who's recently lost a loved one and went through that process of grief and came out with a great victory in her life.
If you would like more information about grief and loss, Dr. Robert Outlaw's series of articles called Using God's Gifts will help you to understand and learn how to cope with the loss of a loved one. This material is offered to you as a free gift by St. Luke's United Methodist Church. If you would like to have a copy of Using God's Gifts, write to St. Luke's United Methodist Church, 222 Northwest 15th, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73103, or call 232-1371.
I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Virginia Johnson, member of St. Luke's Church, who lost her husband, Jimmy, not long ago in death. How long has that been, Virginia?
Well, it was July 9th, this last year.
It's this last year. And how long were you all married?
Well, we would have been married 50 years this next August, so
50 years.
that's quite a while.
How has the Christian faith helped you in this journey and helped you through your grief?
Well, it's been so helpful in so many ways. I don't know what people would do if they hadn't built up a reservoir of spiritual faith.
I agree.
It is something you are going to need. You think maybe it won't happen to me, but it will. And so that is a place that from which you can draw the aid which God has made available through all of the promises He has. Now,
You've been doing that all your life, haven't you?
Trying, but we're always becoming, we never finish. But we did have a strong influence in our lives from St. Luke's Church because we came here as young, married with 2 little kids, and went straight to St. Luke's and became involved in a Sunday school class.
When did you come to St. Luke's?
It was in 1947.
Oh, my.
So that's been a long time.
And when you came, did you find a Sunday school class?
Yes, immediately. We're just luckily directed to a class which later has become a strong class at St. Luke's. But we were able to learn so much through marvelous teachers there, dedicated teachers, and always studying, being interested, confirming our beliefs. And so it wasn't too long after that I was asked to substitute in the 7th grade, and I thought, one Sunday I could do that, but that Sunday stretched into 10 years.
Yes, that right.
And so you have the necessity to prepare each week for those lessons, and by doing that, of course, you do learn so much more than the young people do. Yes,
yeah, you do.
And you have to live your faith for them. They're not going to accept anything fake. So I did get a great deal of preparation and resources through that. And then in the more recent times, I did participate in the Stephen ministry, which was...
Tell us about the Stephen ministry. It's a new ministry at St. Luke's.
Yes, just 5 years ago, I think it was started, where there's an opportunity for lay people to be trained to work with someone in a traumatic situation in their lives on a one-to-one confidential basis to help. And I thought, I would like to try that. which I did and took the training and have had several helpies, but it turned out, while I started out to do this in a more of an unselfish way.
Be a ministry to someone else.
Yes, actually, it was preparing me for something that was going to happen to us.
You received over 50 hours of training then,
yes,
didn't you?
Yes,
in this,
and did learn so much about helping people cope with difficult situations. But this was really going to help me so much too, because 2 years ago, well, it's nearly 3 now, that Jim was diagnosed as having a serious leukemia, and so this caring ministry I could put into our own lives, and it was very difficult for him to have been really a star athlete and have to accept his weakness, which was increasing all the time. We had the resources of our ministers, our Sunday school class, our friends, our children, everybody wonderfully helpful. Prayer, hope sustained us for a long time that there would be a cure. No cure.
That wasn't going to work.
But my prayer was to be strong, to take care of him. His prayer was never to have to go to a nursing home.
How were those prayers answered?
They were answered in God's way. Back surgery made my ailing back strong to help him as he needed more help, and he did not have to leave home at all. And we also were able to be enlisted in the hospice program, which was wonderful resource and help for us. And all the while, everybody was there for us.
Yes. Well, since his death, what have you been able to do that has helped you then get through this process?
Well, I have had much help. I've had a desire to be strong for my children, for my friends, to show that there is a victory even so. So I returned to church and Sunday school immediately, and the very first Sunday I went back, the speaker in our Sunday school class was Douglas McPherson, who is director of the Skyline Ministry here. And it seemed that his message was directed to me. He said, "We have a great need for clothing at the Skyline Ministry, particularly men's clothing." So I thought, this is for me. I will go home at once and clear out the closets, pack up all Jim's clothes, and take them down there, which I did.
The next day?
The next day.
That's what I understood.
And I felt so good about it. I had done something constructive and something as a start.
Right, so that your life can just go on then.
So then I returned to volunteering at Presbyterian Hospital, which I'd been doing for 20 years, to the Stephen Ministry, and to set about in any way I could to be an example, if you'd call it that.
You have been.
For other people in our age group to whom this is going to happen, is happening, and know that Jim would consider that I'm the substitute maybe on our team. We were quite athletically oriented, and that I was going to be a good substitute, a good representative, and I have feel comfortable with talking about him, about things we did, not in despair, but really wanting to carry on and say it's all right.
You've done that. You found your strength and your help in helping others. It's been a great resource for her. Sorrow comes and the pain is there, and it never leaves us the same. It's going to change us. either for good or for bad, for better or for worse. We can become a better and a stronger person, such as Virginia Johnson, draw upon the resources that God brings us in life and enable our lives to be a blessing and a help to someone else. Or it could make us, instead of a better person, it could make us a bitter person if we turn inward and begin to feel sorry for ourselves. But God is constantly bringing healing into the hurts of our lives if we'll allow Him to do that. And there are all kinds of resources that are available to us. Of course, the resources of the Christian faith that reminds us that we belong to a living Christ who is the resurrection and the life, and who promised to be our help and our comfort and our strength if we would draw upon Him and allow Him to be a part of our life. And He ministers through others. We mentioned the Stephen ministry at St. Luke's Church, a ministry of trained lay people to be caregivers, to be there and to extend the care ministry of the church. You can turn to your pastor, you can turn to your church, which becomes the instrument of God's healing in your life. And you can turn to others around you, and you can find outlets of service. We would invite you to write St. Luke's Church. We'd be glad to send you a free brochure written by Dr. Outlaw, who was with us a little earlier, telling about the ministry of the church and using God's gifts in bringing healing and bringing help, enabling us to walk through this pain that we call grief. And we would invite you to call St. Luke's Church, 232-1371, and we would be glad to be there, either as a minister or as a Stephen minister, or you might ask for the connection. We have several professional counselors who are a part of the church who offer their services free for those who need counseling, either through grief or through any of the adjustments that we're making in life. But you can call or you can write St. Luke's Church at 2222 Northwest 15th in Oklahoma City, 73103. We're here to serve. We hope that we can be of ministry to you. Thank you for sharing with us in this time of discovery.
Thank you for watching A Time for Discovery. We hope that we've helped you discover a new direction, a new point of view. If we can be of further help, please call us at St. Luke's United Methodist Church,